Here are two versions of the same vegetable sitting a few feet apart in the same kitchen. The first one is in the bottom drawer of the fridge. It was firm and bright the day it came home in the grocery bag. Now, a week later, it has gone soft at one end, the skin has started to wrinkle, and there is a sour smell when you open the crisper drawer. You already paid for it. In a day or two, you will carry it out to the bin, and the money you spent on it goes into the trash with it. The second one is that same vegetable, sliced thin and left to dry on a bamboo rack in the sun. It sits in a glass jar on a shelf now, at room temperature, with no power running to it at all. And it will still be good in that jar a year from today. Same plant, same kitchen. One of them you paid to throw away. The other one you will be glad you kept. Now here is the part that stayed with me, and it is the reason I wanted to make this. We tend to treat that dried food on the shelf as a faded, second best backup to the fresh one. For a few of these foods, it is the opposite. The dried version comes back richer than it went in. There is more flavor packed into that shriveled piece in the jar, and in one case there is something in it that the fresh vegetable in the drawer never had at all. But you only get that if you do one thing right while it dries. Miss that one step and you still keep the food, but you throw away the best part of what drying can do. I will show you exactly what that one step is. It is simpler than you would guess, and almost everyone drying food at home today gets it wrong. The Japanese built a whole corner of the pantry on this, with a plain word for it. But before we get to the shelf of jars, let me put the modern cost on the table, because that is the thing this quietly replaces. Start with the food we throw out. We waste a startling share of the food we buy. It wilts in the crisper drawer, it grows a spot of fuzz at the back of the shelf, and out it goes in the bin, still half good, grocery money turning into garbage on a weekly loop. That is the first leak in the kitchen. Then look at what we buy to patch the gap. Walk down the dried goods aisle and pick up one small bag of dried mushrooms. Turn it over and read the price against that tiny weight. Ounce for ounce, dried shiitake mushrooms in that little bag can run you more than a good steak. So we let our own fresh food rot in the drawer, and then we hand over a premium for the packaged, dried version of the very same thing. And under all of it, in the corner of the kitchen, the freezer hums day and night, all year long, pulling power off the meter just to hold food cold that a shelf and a little sun used to hold for free. So the money leaves your wallet twice. Once when you buy fresh food you are always going to waste, and again when you rebuy the dried version at a markup. And what replaces all of that costs almost nothing. A knife, a flat drying rack or a cheap mesh net, a dry sunny windowsill, and a little attention. Water out, flavor in. That is close to the whole method, and it is one of the oldest habits in the Japanese kitchen. I did not learn this from a book. I learned it standing in my grandmother's yard as a boy, without once understanding that I was learning anything at all. Every summer, the long rains would end almost overnight, and the sky would turn hard and blue and dry. That was the signal. Out came the flat bamboo trays, lined up along the wooden veranda in the full heat. My grandmother would take a white daikon radish, cut it into long pale ribbons, and lay them across the trays. Split mushrooms went beside them, laid face up to the light. Some years there were rings of persimmon strung on thread under the eaves, or narrow strips of fish stiffening in the sea breeze. For a few days the whole yard smelled faintly sweet, the smell of water leaving fruit and vegetables. Then it all came indoors, light and leathery and shrunk to half its old size, and lived in jars and paper sacks on a back shelf, feeding us right through the cold months when nothing grew outside. None of us ever called that preserving. It was just the pantry, the ordinary way that food waited for you. The dried radish had its own plain everyday name, kiri boshi daikon, and it would turn up softened back into a warm winter stew, as though it had never been away. There is one word that holds this whole shelf together, kanbutsu. It simply means dried things, and it runs the length of the Japanese pantry. the dried radish, dried shiitake mushrooms, kanbutsu, pale ribbons of gourd pared off in long strips and dried, the faintly sweet band you have very likely eaten, rolled inside a piece of sushi without ever once wondering what it was. Himo no, fish split open and dried in the salt air. A whole cuisine standing on one plain idea, that if you take the water out of good food, the food will keep and wait for you. For years, I quietly filed all of it under thrift, something careful people did because they had known hunger and could not bear to waste a thing. Worth respecting, but finished, a habit for another century. So when I finally went looking, as a grown man, half expecting to find nothing beneath it but sentiment, the first thing I turned up caught me off guard. It was a date, written down. Follow the kanbutsu, that dried gourd ribbon, back far enough and you arrive at the year 1712. That is when the lord of the Mibu domain, in the region now called Tochigi, an hour or so north of Tokyo, had gourd seed brought in and set his farmers growing it and drying it into ribbons to sell. That is a dated record, set down at the time, of an entire domain choosing on purpose to build a living out of dried food 300 years ago. And one detail made me sit up. 3 centuries later, that same modest stretch of country, Tochigi, still grows very nearly all of the kanbutsu that Japan produces for itself. The habit did far more than cling to a farmhouse shelf. It grew into a trade that has held on for 300 straight years, old then and written down. But paper only tells you a thing once lived. I wanted to know it was still breathing, in real hands now, and it is. In the south, on the island of Kyushu, there is a family of mushroom makers by the name of Sugimoto. One man started the business in 1954, and his family has carried it ever since, 3 generations deep by now, working with hundreds of small growers who raise their shiitake the slow way, out in the forest on cut oak logs. And that company still treats the drying itself as the heart of the whole craft, and they are quietly insistent about the part the sun plays in it, a business shipping to the whole world, still leaning on a plain step a village grandmother would have known by heart. So the first question was settled. This was real, it was dated, and it was still done under a family name by people who had kept the skill alive for generations. But settling that only made the other question louder, the one I had walked in with from the start. Why should a mushroom, dried right out and then soaked back to life, taste better than it ever did fresh? And what, of all things, was the summer sun actually doing to it up on that tray? That was the answer worth waiting for, and it is where this quietly stops being a story about thrift at all. Stand at that drying rack and 2 different things are going on at once. One of them explains why the food keeps. The other explains why it comes back better than it left, and almost nobody has heard the second one. Take the keeping first. We talk about food going bad as though rot were something the food does on its own, a clock ticking down somewhere inside it. It is closer to the truth to say rot is something that happens to food carried out by other living things. Bacteria settle on the surface and feed, molds take hold and spread, and the food's own enzymes keep working long after harvest, breaking it down from within. Every one of those needs the very same thing to keep going, and that thing is water. So pull the water out of a mushroom or a strip of white daikon radish down past a certain low point, and the whole operation grinds to a halt. The bacteria have nothing to grow in, the molds cannot spread, and those enzymes lock up where they stand. The food has not died so much as been paused, held perfectly still. That is why a dried shiitake or a fistful of dried radish can sit in a sealed jar for months, even a full year, at room temperature, with no fridge and no power of any kind. Take the water out and the clock simply stops. Most people, if they think about drying at all, get about that far. But this is the point where it turns into something more than storage. Lift that dried mushroom back off the shelf and drop it into a bowl of cool water to soak. As it swells back to life, it starts doing something it flatly could not do while it was fresh and whole. The drying split its cell walls open, and now, reviving in the water, it builds a savory compound called guanylate that the fresh mushroom hardly carried at all. Set that guanylate beside the glutamate the mushroom always had, the deep savory note you already know from a ripe tomato or a hard wedge of parmesan, and the two of them together do not add, they multiply. The savory taste the Japanese named umami climbs to something several times deeper than any fresh mushroom on your cutting board could ever reach. Soaked back from dry, the mushroom tastes more of mushroom than it ever did the day it was picked. And that soaking water, gone gold and cloudy in the bowl, most people tip it straight down the drain. That water is the finest stock in the kitchen. A clear, savory dashi you pulled for nothing out of a mushroom you were going to eat anyway. The one thing everyone throws away is the best part of the whole deal. Let me step out of the chemistry for a moment. I am making my way through these old household skills one at a time, and it turns out there is a quiet, growing crowd doing the same, pulling these plain, half-forgotten habits back into daily life. If that is a table you would like a seat at, subscribe and pull up a chair. Then come straight back, because what follows is the real reason I wanted to make this one. The flavor, honestly, I could accept. Concentrate a food and it tastes stronger, fair enough. But then I ran into the business with the sun, and that one genuinely stopped me where I stood. A raw shiitake is packed with a substance called ergosterol. Sitting there in the fresh mushroom, it does nothing for you at all. But ergosterol holds one strange talent. When ultraviolet light lands on it, the very same invisible part of sunlight that burns human skin, it changes. It turns into vitamin D. It is the very same kind of reaction your own skin runs when you stand out under the sun on a bright day. Which means a tray of mushrooms lying in the afternoon light is doing far more than shedding water. It is building a vitamin that simply was not in them when they were picked. The sun is not just drying the mushroom, the sun is feeding it. And this is no piece of country folklore. Researchers at Kobe Pharmaceutical University set dried shiitake out in the sun and measured what came back. A single mushroom that began with barely a trace of vitamin D rose to many times that level after only a few hours in the afternoon light. A piece of dried food, quietly making a nutrient on a bamboo tray, powered by nothing but the open sky above it. It even comes down to which way up they lie. The substance that turns into the vitamins sits thickest in the gills, those fine papery ribs on the underside of the cap. So you lay the mushroom gills upward, open to the sky, so the light falls straight onto the part that can put it to use. Cap resting down, gills tipped up to the sun. And there at last is the one step I promised you back at the very start, the thing almost everyone drying food at home quietly gets wrong. Dry your mushrooms in the dark, in a closed dehydrator or a low oven, and they come out perfectly kept and completely stripped of this gift. You saved the food, but it never met the sun, so it never made the vitamin, and it never built that deepest layer of flavor either. The whole gap between a mushroom that was merely stored and one that was truly changed is a few hours of sunlight. Give them the sun and you will never again see a shriveled mushroom in a jar as the sad, faded cousin of the fresh one. It is richer and more nourishing than the day it left the ground, and the price of that was a single afternoon in the light. Water out, flavor in, and in the mushroom's case, a whole vitamin carried in along with it. So how do you actually do this in your own kitchen? There is next to nothing to it. Start with whatever you have too much of, the mushrooms slightly past their best, a radish, a few carrots going limp, even the odd vegetable you already know you will not cook in time. Cut it thin, so the water has only a short distance to escape. Spread the pieces in a single layer across a rack, a flat basket, or a cheap mesh drying net you can hang, with any mushrooms turned gills upward. Set that in the brightest, driest, most open spot you have, a windowsill in full afternoon sun, a balcony rail, a corner of the yard where the air actually moves. Bring it indoors before the damp settles each evening, put it back out the next morning, and keep at it until the pieces are hard and bone dry, snapping cleanly instead of bending. Then store them in a sealed jar somewhere cool and dark. When you want to cook with them, soak them soft in water, and whatever you do, keep that soaking water for your pot. Now let me be honest about where this does not work, because that honesty is the whole point of this channel. Drying in the open air wants dry, sunny, low humidity weather. If you live somewhere gray and wet, the air will fight you the whole way, and the food can spoil before it ever finishes drying. There, a dehydrator or a low oven will dry it safely and keep it just as long. You give up the sun's vitamin in exchange for reliability, though you can still set sun-loving pieces like mushrooms on a bright windowsill for a few hours afterward and win a little of it back. And there is one real way to ruin a batch, the mistake that catches people out. It is stopping too early. If any moisture is still hiding in the food when you close the lid, that trapped damp is precisely what mold has been waiting for, and the whole jar can turn. So dry it all the way through, truly hard, before you ever seal it. One last honest word: drying keeps food that is still good. It will not rescue food that has already gone off, so always start with something sound. So if it is this cheap and this good, why did the drying baskets vanish from so many kitchens in the first place? There is no villain in this story. What happened is quieter and a little sad. Drying asks something of you. You have to slice, lay things out, watch the weather, carry them in at dusk, check them for damp. It is a small daily rhythm, and it only lives on while somebody keeps tending it. Then the freezer arrived and settled into the corner of the kitchen, and the supermarket lined a whole aisle with the dried goods ready-made in little bags, and that daily rhythm stopped earning its place. It was simply easier to freeze the surplus, or to buy the dried mushrooms in a packet, than to tend a tray in the sun. Nobody came and took the habit away from us. We set it down ourselves, one busy season at a time, until a whole generation grew up having never watched a single person do it. And that is roughly where the money went too. There is no profit in your windowsill, your leftover carrots, and a free afternoon of sunshine. There is a great deal of profit in the freezer running on your meter every hour of the year, and in the marked up bag on the dried goods shelf. The money quietly flowed toward the things you have to keep buying and keep powering, and away from the one thing that was always free. The sun has never once sent anybody an invoice. This is the kind of plain knowledge that used to move straight from a grandmother's hands into a child's, without anyone thinking it needed writing down. It very nearly slipped through the gap in a single generation. It does not have to. Learn to dry just one thing this year, and it becomes yours to pass on. So tell me one thing in the comments. What is the food you keep buying and keep throwing away half-used? The one that always turns to mush at the back of your fridge? That is the very first thing I would lay out on a rack, and I would like to hear what yours is. And if you want the next one, subscribe, because next I am taking on the single kitchen tool you are meant to keep for your whole life, and the one plain stone that holds it sharper than the day you first bought it. Same family of old knowledge, same few dollar logic. So this week, take the food you were about to throw away, give it to the sun, and let it come back better than it left. Water out, flavor in.